For 11 years, Stephen Colbert built the most powerful desk in late-night television, pulling in millions of viewers every single night as the undisputed number one. And then, CBS canceled the entire franchise anyway. There was no corporate warning, no prior negotiation, and no network retirement special. Instead, CBS issued a cold, single-paragraph statement, but it was missing the exact word every journalist in America noticed immediately: thanks. Just 3 days before that corporate axe fell, Colbert uttered 5 specific words on live television that changed everything, starting a countdown that could not be stopped. This isn't the standard retirement story the network wants you to believe. We are uncovering what really happened behind the scenes at CBS, because this historic ending didn't happen the way they are telling you it did.
Sir Paul McCartney closing the show in a rousing fashion.
The announcement that stopped Hollywood.
Cast from the Ed Sullivan Theater, where... No, we were lucky.
The phone calls started before the press release even landed. Producers, agents, network executives, all of them were scrambling and asking the same question: how did we not see this coming? It was a Tuesday, ordinary by every measure. No scandal brewing and controversy circling, no footage leaking from a back corridor, just a regular news cycle doing what regular news cycles do. And then Stephen Colbert dropped the bomb. He was leaving The Late Show, CBS, the desk he had turned into a cultural institution, the chair that Letterman himself had handed down like a crown. All of it, done. The internet did not walk to that story. It ran. Within minutes, his name was trending in every major market. Twitter collapsed under the weight of it. Reddit threads spun into chaos. YouTube comments flooded with fans who genuinely did not know what to do with the information. Some refused to believe it and wrote paragraphs. Some just typed one word over and over: no. But here is what nobody was asking in those first frantic hours. Not really. They were reacting and grieving. They were sharing clips, memories, and favorite moments from 11 years of television that had meant something real to them. What they were not doing was stopping to ask the harder question: why now? Stephen Colbert is not a man who does anything without intention. Everyone in that industry knows it. His former colleagues know it, and his writers know it. Even his critics know it. He is precise, deliberate, and thinks 3 steps ahead of the room at all times. So when a man like that walks away from the most visible chair in American late-night television, the word retirement does not cover it. Something happened. To understand what that something is, you have to go back. Not to the beginning of The Late Show. Not even to the moment CBS came knocking. You have to go back to a Tuesday night in May of 2025, because that was the night the first real crack appeared. Not on camera or in any headline, but in a conversation that sources close to the production described as the moment the energy in that building shifted permanently. Colbert had just finished taping. The show had gone well by all external measures. The guest had delivered, and the monologue had landed. The audience went home happy. But backstage, something was different. Those who were there that night describe a version of Stephen Colbert they had not seen before. Quiet in a way that felt final, not tired in the ordinary sense. Not the tiredness that 11 years of nightly television carves into a person. Something deeper. Something that does not get fixed by a vacation or a long weekend in the mountains. It was the tiredness of a man who had already made his decision. He just had not told anyone yet. The official announcement came in early 2026. The statement was measured, gracious. Everything you would expect from a man who spent 2 decades mastering the art of saying exactly what he wants to say in exactly the right number of words. He spoke about gratitude. He spoke about the extraordinary privilege of doing this work. He mentioned his team, the audience, and said the time had come. What he did not say was louder than any of it. He did not say CBS had been a great partner. He did not say he was proud of what they had built together. He thanked the people in the room. Not the network writing the checks. Journalists caught it. Former television insiders caught it. A few sharp-eyed fans caught it too. And that omission sat in the air like a question that nobody at CBS was rushing to answer. Because here is what we know about how these endings usually work in television. When it is clean, both sides celebrate together. You get the joint press release and the glowing quotes from the network president. You get the farewell special announced within 48 hours. The machinery of a graceful exit fires up immediately because everyone wants to control the narrative. That is not what happened here. CBS released a single paragraph, formal, brief, almost corporate in its distance. There was no immediate announcement of a tribute, no special, and there was no indication that the network was racing to honor the man who had kept that time slot alive for over a decade. The silence was not neutral, it was loud. And so, here is the question that this story is really about. Not whether Stephen Colbert is tired. He is. He has said as much in his own words, across multiple interviews over the past 2 years. Not whether late-night television is changing. It is. Anyone paying attention already knows that. The real question is this: was Stephen Colbert pushed, or did he jump before the floor gave way entirely? Because the answer to that question changes everything. It changes how we read 11 years of television. It changes what we think about CBS. And it changes what happens next in the most brutally competitive time slot in American broadcasting. The full story has not been told yet, but it starts here, building a late-night empire from nothing. Picture this: September 8th, 2015, the Ed Sullivan Theater, New York City. 6.55 million people tuned in that night, not to watch a talk show host, to watch a man step into the most intimidating chair in American television. The chair David Letterman had owned for 22 years. Nobody knew if Colbert could do it, including Colbert. And here is what makes that moment so important to understand. Because the empire he was about to build did not start with confidence. It started with doubt. It started with a man walking away from the only version of himself the public had ever known, and betting everything on a version nobody had seen yet. That bet would take years to pay off. But when it did, it changed everything. To understand what Colbert built at CBS, you have to go back further, all the way back to a cable show most people treated as a joke at first. Before The Late Show, Colbert spent 9 years hosting the Colbert Report on Comedy Central, 9 years playing a character. A loud, blustering, right-wing pundit who said outrageous things with a straight face. It was satire, sharp, surgical, and quietly, it became one of the most culturally influential shows on television. The Colbert Report earned 2 Peabody Awards and 29 Emmy Award nominations, including Emmy wins for Outstanding Variety Series in 2013 and 2014. That is not a small legacy. That is the kind of resume that makes a network president pick up the phone. And in April of 2014, one did. David Letterman announced on his April 3rd show that he would be retiring in 2015. The late-night world went into an immediate frenzy. Who replaces a legend? Who is even remotely qualified to sit in that chair? CBS had a name, one name. CBS President and CEO Leslie Moonves called Colbert one of the most inventive and respected forces on television. But here is what that announcement did not tell you. It asked Colbert to do something almost impossible: kill the character that made him famous, the pundit, the persona, the mask he had worn for a decade. CBS did not want that version of Stephen Colbert. They wanted the real one. And nobody, not the critics, not the fans, not even people inside CBS, knew who that was. The first season was rough. That is the honest truth. He debuted to massive numbers. The curiosity factor was real. But as the weeks wore on, the audience began to settle, and the show was still finding its footing. Critics were polite, some were skeptical, the ratings dipped. The comparisons to Letterman were relentless and unforgiving. For a lesser man, that period would have broken something. For Colbert, it sharpened everything. He leaned into the political moment. He found a tone that was uniquely his own. Serious when it needed to be, ridiculous when it needed to be, and ferociously, unapologetically itself at all times. He described the shift himself on that final night. He said that once he moved from Comedy Central to the bigger CBS stage, he realized their job was different. Not to feel the news in the audience, but to feel it with them. That one shift, that one reframe, that was the key that unlocked everything. By his second season, the numbers told the story. The Late Show finished the 2016 to 2017 television season, averaging 3.19 million nightly viewers, dethroning Jimmy Fallon and The Tonight Show for the first time. It was The Late Show's first season-long ratings win over The Tonight Show since 2010. Read that again. He did not just survive replacing Letterman. He won, on a playing field that Fallon had dominated for years, against a show with a bigger budget, a younger audience, and the full force of NBC behind it. And he did it by being more himself, not less. What followed was a decade of dominance that late night had not seen in a generation. In recent seasons, The Late Show averaged between 2.4 million and 2.8 million total viewers per episode, consistently topping Jimmy Kimmel Live and The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Night after night, year after year, the desk held, political chaos around him, a global pandemic that forced the show into his home, a writer's strike that gutted the industry, a media landscape shifting beneath his feet in real time. None of it moved that needle, because the audience was not just watching a show, they were watching someone they trusted. That is the thing about what Colbert built that the ratings cannot fully capture. It was not viewership, it was loyalty. He once told People magazine that he tried never to take for granted filming in the Ed Sullivan Broadway Theater, having that tremendous audience, or having the ability to work with the funniest people he knew every day. He meant that. You could feel it in every broadcast. And that is exactly what makes what happened next so hard to explain. Because you do not walk away from something like this. Not voluntarily, or when you are still winning. Not when the audience still shows up every single night like it is the most important hour of their day. The Late Show's cancellation sparked widespread conversation after CBS insisted the decision was based on financial considerations. Financial considerations. For a show that was still #1 in its time slot, still beating its competition, still drawing millions of loyal viewers, something powerful does not just quietly disappear because of a spreadsheet. And yet, here we are, which means the real story, the one CBS has not told, is still waiting. The cracks behind the curtain. It was a Monday night in July of 2025. The monologue started like any other. The audience was warm and the desk was familiar. The cameras were rolling exactly the way they had rolled for 10 years straight. And then Stephen Colbert said 5 words that changed everything. He called it a big, fat bribe. Not a rumor or a whisper. It was not a carefully worded tweet from a publicist. He said it live, into a microphone, on CBS, on the network owned by the very company he was describing. Colbert was referring to the $16 million settlement paid by Paramount to settle a lawsuit filed by Donald Trump over the editing of a 60 Minutes interview. Colbert called it a big fat bribe, referencing the pending sale of Paramount to Skydance Media. The studio audience laughed. They cheered. They had no idea what was about to happen. 3 days later, The Late Show was dead. Colbert told his audience at the Ed Sullivan Theater that he had learned the night before that next year would be their last season, that the network would be ending The Late Show in May. The audience responded with boos and groans. Colbert said he shared their feelings. That sentence, that delivery, and that look on his face. This was not a man announcing a retirement. This was a man announcing something that had been done to him, and the country noticed immediately. CBS moved quickly with a statement. Clean, corporate, deliberate. CBS called it purely a financial decision. They added it was not related in any way to the show's performance, content, or other matters happening at Paramount. Read that statement carefully. Every word of it matters. They did not say the timing was coincidental, nor did they address the 3-day gap between the monologue and the cancellation. They said performance and content were not factors, which is a very specific thing to say, because nobody had asked about performance yet. Nobody had raised content as an issue. CBS volunteered those denials without being prompted. And in legal and corporate language, that is not reassurance. That is a tell. Trump celebrated publicly. He wrote that he absolutely loved that Colbert got fired. He said Colbert's talent was even less than his ratings. He then went after Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon, claiming they were next. That post said more than any CBS press release, because here is what the numbers actually showed at the time. The Late Show was still leading the race by a significant margin. Second quarter Nielsen ratings showed the program had 2.42 million viewers across 41 new episodes, taking some 9% of the audience share and besting other shows in its time slot. It was also the only show to rake in more viewers than in the previous quarter. Let that land. The most watched show in late night, growing, not shrinking, and CBS killed it anyway. U.S. senators started asking questions within days. Senator Markey wrote to Paramount asking directly whether any official in the Trump administration, including the president or an official at the FCC, had contacted the company about Colbert's monologue. He asked whether they had requested Paramount or CBS take any action in response. Those are not rhetorical questions. Those are the questions you ask when you already suspect the answer. Paramount never gave a satisfying response. Colbert himself was careful, measured. In the months that followed, he gave interviews but drew no hard lines publicly. He had a show to finish, a team to protect, a network relationship he still had to navigate for 10 more months. But in one conversation, he said enough. In a GQ cover story, Colbert said it was a reasonable thing to think that CBS canceled him to appease the Trump administration. He also revealed something that cut even deeper. He said, "The best reason to be number one is that the network does not interfere with you." And he said they had enjoyed 9 unfucked years. The implication was clear. Year 10 was different. 9 years of protection, 1 year of exposure. And that 1 year happened to be the year Paramount needed a government merger approved. The economics were real. Late show viewership had declined from a peak of over 3 million 6 years prior to roughly 2.4 million by mid-2025. Ad revenue dropped about 25% from 2022 to 2024. Nobody disputes that. The landscape was genuinely shifting. But here is the problem with the pure financial argument. Every late-night show was losing viewers. Every single one. That was not a Colbert problem. That was an industry problem. And Colbert was still winning that shrinking race by a significant margin. You do not cancel the best horse because the track is getting smaller, not unless something else is driving the decision. Colbert himself told the New York Times that he believed 2 things could both be true at once. That the show was costing CBS too much, and that political pressure played a role in the timing. 2 things can be true. That sentence became the quiet thesis of everything that followed. Because the financial pressures were real. Nobody is pretending otherwise. But the timing of that cancellation. 3 days after that monologue, weeks before a merger vote, with a president publicly celebrating on social media. That is not a coincidence. That is a sequence. And here is what that sequence reveals about everything CBS has not said out loud. The cracks behind the curtain were never really about ratings. They were never about ad revenue models or streaming disruption or the changing habits of late-night viewers. The crack was always about power. Who had it and wanted it, and what one network was willing to sacrifice to protect it. Colbert knew that. He had known it for a while. The CBS factor, money, politics, and power. Here is a number that CBS did not want you to think about too carefully. $40 million. That is what anonymous sources inside the network told the press the Late Show was losing every single year. 40 to 50 million. Leaked to journalists the very weekend after the cancellation announcement. Neat, tidy, perfectly timed, almost like it was prepared in advance. Colbert addressed it directly on his first show back. He said someone at CBS followed up their gracious press release with a gracious anonymous leak, saying they pulled the plug because of losses pegged between 40 million and 50 million a year. He called 40 million a big number. Then he said he could see them losing 24 million. But he wondered where Paramount could have possibly spent the other 16 million. The audience erupted, because everyone in that room already knew the answer. In mid-2024, Skydance reached an agreement with Paramount Global to combine the companies in an $8 billion all-stock deal. At the time of the agreement, Paramount was grappling with executive turnover, declining cable revenues, and mounting losses in streaming. $8 billion. That is the prize that was sitting on the table. The merger that would rescue a financially struggling media giant from the hole it had been digging for years. But to get there, Paramount needed one thing above everything else: government approval. And the government in charge of approving it had a very specific opinion about Stephen Colbert. The FCC was headed by Trump loyalist Brendan Carr. Paramount paid $16 million to settle the CBS and Trump lawsuit in July 2025 to ensure that the FCC would not try to halt the merger. That payment had a name in media and financial circles almost immediately: the Trump tax. It was the cost of doing business with an administration that had made its feelings about Colbert loudly, repeatedly, and publicly clear. Trump had called for him to be fired. He had mocked his ratings. He had celebrated every stumble. And now the company that owned CBS needed that same administration to wave through an $8 billion transaction. So they paid, and then they canceled the show. And then they said it had nothing to do with any of that. The show did have a budget of more than $100 million per season. Of the 3 network late-night shows, The Late Show had by far the smallest digital footprint on YouTube and other platforms. The show had struggled on Paramount+. Those are real numbers. Nobody is disputing them. But here is what the financial argument leaves out. Colbert was reportedly making between $15 million and $20 million per year. Industry analysts noted that a pay cut alone would not have solved the problem. There was a path to making the numbers work. There almost always is when a network actually wants to find one. Smaller budgets, renegotiated contracts, a different production model. Other networks had done exactly that with struggling shows they still believed in. CBS did not look for that path. They looked for the exit. And then came the changes that confirmed everything the financial argument was trying to deny. After Skydance completed its takeover of Paramount in August 2025, the company began restructuring operations and cutting costs. In October 2025, Paramount acquired the Free Press, a digital news and commentary website founded by journalist Bari Weiss, for about $150 million in cash and stock. As part of the transaction, Weiss was appointed editor-in-chief of CBS News. Think about that sequence carefully. They canceled a show for being too expensive, then spent $150 million acquiring a right-leaning news outlet and installing its founder to run CBS News. A company that could not afford The Late Show somehow found the budget for that. Trump praised the decisions to hire Weiss and to cancel The Late Show. He praised both, in the same breath, as though they were two parts of the same strategy, because they were. The layoffs came next. Employees were notified of the first round of cuts, impacting around 1,000 people across various departments. Further cuts, impacting roughly 1,000 additional employees, were expected to follow. Close to 100 CBS News employees were impacted in the first round alone. 2,000 jobs gone. The company that had called The Late Show cancellation an agonizing financial decision was now gutting its own newsroom, restructuring, repositioning, rebuilding in a very specific direction, away from everything Colbert represented, and toward everything that made the merger possible. Financial analysts and industry executives widely regarded the settlement of the lawsuit against CBS over 60 Minutes as part of the Trump tax for the overall transaction. There was widespread speculation about whether additional concessions might be included in the deal. Additional concessions. That phrase sat quietly in the financial press for weeks, analysts using careful language to describe what many of them privately believed. That canceling The Late Show was not a financial decision dressed up as a political one. It was a political decision dressed up as a financial one. The $40 to $50 million annual loss was real, but it had been real for years. The show had been making cuts, finding efficiencies, working within the constraints. Colbert himself said they had looked at the show's budgets and made cuts, all while remaining the #1 show in late night. They were doing the work, they were holding the line, and none of it mattered. Because the calculus at the top of Paramount had nothing to do with ad revenue or streaming numbers or YouTube footprints. It had to do with what it cost to make $8 billion happen, and Stephen Colbert was part of that cost. The CBS cancellation of The Late Show, announced a week before the FCC approved the Skydance transaction, appeared to many to be another concession to Trump. CBS maintained it was purely a financial decision, 1 week before the approval. Not 1 year, not 6 months, 1 week. The timing of this ending was not an accident, it was a closing argument, and the verdict had already been decided long before anyone told Colbert what Colbert's exit means for late night forever. On the night of May 21st, 2026, Paul McCartney walked onto the stage of the Ed Sullivan Theater, the same building where the Beatles performed in 1964, the same stage that launched a generation, the same room where Stephen Colbert had stood night after night for 11 years. McCartney was given the ceremonial honor of turning out the lights in the Ed Sullivan Theater. He flipped a switch that sent the theater into a green interdimensional portal. The final number had McCartney and Colbert singing the Beatles classic Hello Goodbye, joined by Elvis Costello, former bandleader John Batiste, current bandleader Louis Cato, and a parade of staff dancing through the stage. Hello Goodbye. Of all the songs in all the world, that one landed like a gut punch, because everybody watching knew it was not just a song, it was a eulogy. 6.74 million people tuned in for the finale. It was the most watched weeknight episode in the show's entire history. That number marked a dramatic jump from the show's first quarter average of roughly 2.69 million viewers. Think about that for a moment. CBS canceled the show because not enough people were watching, and then 6.74 million people showed up to say goodbye. The irony was not lost on anyone, especially not Colbert. But the finale was only part of the story. The larger question was the one nobody in the industry wanted to answer out loud. What comes next? CBS announced that Comics Unleashed with Byron Allen would move into the 11:35 slot starting May 22nd. The comedy talk show features a rotating panel of comedians performing their material. That is what replaced one of the most culturally significant shows in the history of American television. A panel show, cheap to produce, easy to syndicate. No political opinions, no monologues that make network executives sweat. David Letterman argued the network did not want to spend any money. He said they would charge Byron Allen a reasonable price. He would sell the advertising for Comics Unleashed, and it would simply be comics talking about funny stuff. Letterman built that time slot, and he watched it get dismantled in real time. He was not quiet about how he felt. The death of the Late Show franchise signals the official end of the monoculture broadcast era. For over 3 decades, the 11:35 slot was the baseline of American cultural commentary. By entirely abandoning the space, CBS accelerated a trend that will inevitably force Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel into identical corners when their respective contracts expire. Colbert himself had started asking the question publicly. Months before the finale, he said late night was in a weird spot with people questioning its future. He told fellow hosts he had been asked to make a case for late night multiple times over his final 10 months. He said people kept asking why it should continue to exist. And his answer was simple. People like it. I enjoy doing it. That answer was honest, and it was heartbreaking. Because the people who canceled the show were not asking whether people liked it. They were asking whether it was useful to them, and it was not. CBS itself called Colbert irreplaceable and retired the Late Show franchise entirely. Not just the host, the entire franchise. 33 years of television history. Gone. That word matters. Irreplaceable. They did not say they were looking for someone new. They did not say the format would continue. They said the show was irreplaceable and then replaced it with something that cost a fraction of the price. The gap between those two statements is where the real story lives. Colbert knew it was over before CBS said a word. Not because he read the numbers wrong, but because he understood what the numbers meant inside a company chasing an $8 billion merger while managing a president who called for his firing on social media. He told People magazine that maybe CBS saved his life, that it takes a lot of bone marrow to do the show every day, and that now he would be stepping down with enough time and energy to do other things he wanted to do. That is grace under pressure. That is a man choosing dignity over bitterness in the final chapter. But make no mistake, the ending was not clean. It was not mutual, and history will not record it the way CBS wrote the press release. Stephen Colbert did not just host a television show. He held the line, night after night, in a room that history built, through a decade that tested every institution it touched. He started with 2.55 million viewers in 2015 and ended with 6.74 million watching him say goodbye. He grew the audience while they canceled the show. That is the final, perfect summary of everything that happened here. The legacy is intact and the desk is gone. The era is over. And somewhere in the quiet that follows, the question Colbert always asked is still hanging in the air. Are you paying attention? If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Tell us what The Late Show meant to you. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. And we will see you in the next chapter.